Continuing our special with Kathi Miracle, communication tips for families.
Logging pod starts like a conversation. Cup of coffee with no destination. Just voices trying to understand what's happening across this land. From your stories told to the pages turned. Every question, every word supported by SheSharesStudios.net.
Hello, and welcome to the Vlogging Pod. Joining us once again is dementia educator and advocate Kathi Miracle. Now, before we start, Kathi, for our listeners who may be joining us for the first time, what are some of the signs and symptoms families should be looking for that could indicate dementia or cognitive decline?
So one of the things I love to do is educate, as you know. And so I always tell people that when somebody starts repeating themselves, when somebody is out of their routine, they look more disheveled when they should be looking more meticulous. Somebody's not eating like they normally would. I mean, we typically know as family members, whether that's a spouse, a parent, a sibling, that we kind of know their routine. We know what was important to them lifelong. My mom is a meticulous individual, and if she showed up in clothes she's 91 years old and she still irons.
Oh, wow.
Yet she still flips her own mattress, which makes me a little nervous too. But if my mom showed up somewhere and her clothes were wrinkled or her hair wasn't done or her makeup wasn't on, I'd be like, what is going on? That's not my mother. So I think that we kind of know our family members and we know their routine. And what starts happening is they don't stay on point with their routine. We start finding things in odd places, like we find the remote control in the refrigerator, or, the car keys have ended up in the dog food or the box of cereal. Or something's just not right. Mail is piling up. It's dusty. The laundry's not done. There's always these little signs, and it's easy to excuse them away. Someone might say, Mom, like if it was me, Mom, usually your clothes are ironed. Oh, I just didn't feel like it. And it's easy for individuals. They become really good at deflecting and making excuses. I've met some people who've really perfected the art of that when they're in cognitive decline. And because sometimes we're so busy as a society, whether it's a spouse, a child, we tend to kind of help them excuse it away. Dementia is the second most feared diagnosis in the world, with cancer of any kind being the first. And it's unfortunately shows like, Dateline, 60 Minutes, 2020 have not done the industry very well because they paint the picture of somebody in the very late stage of Alzheimer's or dementia. And people think they go from the day of diagnosis to the end stage in 24 hours. And that's not true. There's a lot of life to be lived in between that. But we get very scared, like that's not what I wanted my future to be like, or that's not what we planned in our retirement years. So it's very easy to accept the deflection or the excuses and ignore it and shove it under the rug or put it on a shelf until a crisis happens. And so I always tell people, be mindful of, the routine. And when the routine starts getting wonky or that mom or dad say something that's odd, you really that's the time we should be paying more attention and asking tougher questions versus putting it on a shelf and ignoring it, hoping it'll go away.
Right. So one of the challenges we hear about most often is communication. Most people say they know something is changing with their loved one,
Right.
but they're not always sure how to respond or how to keep conversations productive and supportive. Now,
Right.
so today, let's spend some time talking about communication because I'm a talker.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the trainings I get asked to do a lot with. I do trainings for family caregivers. I do it for professional caregivers. And communication tips are one of the things that I really dive deep into it because as a person travels through the dementia journey, their ability to communicate changes. And so at each stage of the dementia journey, I kind of give tips and tricks on that. So first of all, there are actually 7 stages of dementia. When you talk with family or you talk to doctors, a lot of times they'll say 3. And so families get confused over, is there 3? Is there 7? Well, in reality, the dementia scale, and now they've started doing like A, B, C, and D in each stage too, which makes it even more confusing. So to somewhat keep it somewhat simplified, I talk to people about there are 7 stages. Stage 1, 2, and 3 are in a mild form of
Mhm.
dementia, which is where doctors get the 3 stages. And then stages 4 and 5 are moderate, and stages 6 and 7 are more severe. And so, when family members, it's probably easier to talk about mild, moderate, or severe for them. That seems to be a more simplified way to talk and that they can understand. So that's how I'm going to be talking about it today is in those stages. So communication will change throughout the journey. What's normal is somebody who can still have full conversations. They understand what's being said. They can track the conversation. They have the ability to still form words and speak for themselves, and they can still read and write. They even can understand body language and facial expressions and tone of voice. Where the challenges start coming in through the journey is that they will repeat familiar words. They
Mhm.
describe objects rather than naming them. For example, someone may point to their wrist and say, I can't find my clock. And what they mean is a watch, but they talk about a clock. So they start describing the object, or they'll say, where's that thing that I can, I need to take a note and I use it. It's like a stick and a pen, a pencil. Yeah, that's what I'm looking. I know, so
Mhm.
they'll start doing it. They actually start talking less. They start almost isolating. Their world becomes smaller and smaller, and they speak less. They will, in a conversation, maybe do a lot of nodding or smiling, but they really aren't tracking the conversation at all. They actually rely a lot on hand gestures, hand motions. They have difficulty finding words and they easily lose their train of thought. In later stages of dementia, we'll hear professionals will call it a word salad, but it's
Mhm.
disorganized speech where
Mhm.
they may think they're saying something and all the words they use, you have no idea what they're even talking about, but they believe wholeheartedly that they had a full sentence. And that becomes where communication back and forth gets really difficult. So let's talk first of all about how do we communicate with somebody in the early stages of dementia? Well, for everybody out there, stage 1 is you have no dementia at all. I don't know why that's stage 1 and not stage 0. I didn't create the stages. But I will jokingly, like, if my husband loses his teeth or he can't find something, I'll go, "Well, you are in stage 1 of dementia." And one of us finds it funny and one of us doesn't. And so when people are in those early stages of dementia, you actually can still communicate with them like you normally would. Stage 2,
Mhm.
stage 3 is where someone would be diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, or a doctor may say they're in early stages of cognitive decline. But even in stage 3, mild cognitive impairment, someone can still drive, they can still live independently, they can still manage the world around them, and you can typically talk with them like you normally would. So
Mhm.
there's not a lot that you need to do to change your communication in the early stages of cognitive decline. It's when we start getting into the middle stages of cognitive decline, that's when we really need to maybe start changing how we talk to people. So, what does that look like? So, in stage 4 is actually moderate cognitive decline, and stage 5 is moderately severe cognitive decline, which lands in the middle of cognitive decline. And this is where communication start changes. It
Mhm.
may take some creativity to communicate with the individual, and it may take more than one attempt. So, I tell people to shorten your sentences. Do not give somebody a lot of direction. If you need them, like, let's
Mm.
say you're helping them brush their teeth, you might say, pick up your toothbrush. They pick up the toothbrush. Okay, get the brush wet, with the water. Okay, I'm going to hand you the toothpaste, or we're going to put the toothpaste here. Okay, now, I mean, you really have to break it down into really simple steps. As people age, men, I always say God has a sense of humor because men, the decibel range they start losing their hearing is the same decibel range as women's voices. And so,
Yeah,
uh,
okay.
you know, my mom used to complain a lot that my dad couldn't hear her. I'm like, no, he really, he's looking
Um,
at me and he's ignoring me. No, he really can't hear you. So for women, if you're for wives or daughters who are interacting with, a husband or a father, I actually tell them to lower their voice. And it feels funny when you start doing it. With practice, you can do it well. Um, but I will actually demonstrate and say, if you lower your voice like this and talk a little bit slower, your father or your husband will actually be able to hear you. And so I say, lower your voice like a DJ on a radio. And when you can do that, and you may feel at the rate of speech you're talking, you're like walking through mud and it's very slow. But by being able to slow your rate of speech down, the person actually can process the information a lot better. When we're
Mhm.
talking at our normal rate of speed, it's like putting a record on the fastest speed and you're going, "Blah, blah, 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 blah," and that's what that person is hearing. And then they wonder why the person didn't answer them because they didn't
Mhm.
hear them. I
Right.
always say, make sure you have eye contact because some people get really good at starting to read lips and they watch your facial expression, your body language, and the tone of voice, and they pick up and follow that before they will ever actually listen to the words you're speaking. And so make sure you're facing them. I see family members do this in professionals where they try to talk to somebody in another room. That person doesn't even know, like, they just think they're hearing voices. They don't even know where that sound is coming from. And they're more looking and focused on where is that sound coming from than what is actually being said. So don't talk to somebody from another room. Actually go and sit with them, face them, talk with them, make sure you have their attention. If they're wearing hearing aids, make sure their wearing hearing aids are on, make sure the battery is, working too. That's helpful. But you also want to slow yourself down and only give little bits of information. I always say too, only if you're asking them if they want something, only give two choices. They don't need a bunch of choices. Like walking into a restaurant and handing somebody a menu, forget it. They're just going to shut down. It's too much. They're overstimulated. So I always say if you're helping someone dress in the morning, you can say, do you want to wear the blue shirt or do you want to wear the green shirt? And you can show it to them and then they can still choose. You want to continue to support their independence and their choices as much as possible, but at the same time, don't give them too many choices.
Right.
I also, what somebody hears and how that's interpreted and how they process that is a completely different part of the brain than what they read and what they see. So when communication gets difficult just from talking and auditory, then I talk to people about laminating pictures, getting, certain key phrases like, are you hungry? Or let's go to the bathroom. Have those already written out and laminated because you'll use them over and over. But when you can show somebody that, and they can read it, they'll understand that a lot faster than if you're talking to them and asking them to interpret what you're saying. So I always tell people it's two different parts of the brain. I've had family members. I remember a daughter who got really super frustrated because she'd be taking her dad out for whatever errands they had to go to. And he
Mhm.
would, in the first 5 minutes, where are we going? Where are we going? Where are we going? And he would say, Dad, we're going to the doctor. And Dad, we're going to the pharmacy. And then 5 minutes later, he'd go, where are we going? And so I said, well, why don't you write out your list? This is your first stop, the doctor's office at 8 a.m. And then the next stop will be at the pharmacy to drop off a prescription. And then the next stop is the grocery store. And then when he says, where are we going? You can say, Dad, it's number one on the list. And he can read it and refer back to it. And I said, and when you do that, then you're giving him control and trying to support where he's still independent. And you're respecting that because it becomes a dignity issue too for individuals.
Yeah.
And so when we can help people stay more independent, that's going to help them in the long run. And it helps with our own, as a caregiver, our frustrations too.
Right. My mother is in her 70s, and one of the thing I'm really bad at, because and we all tell our stories, and some people, repeat them a little bit more. I'm sure I'm bad at it too. But for myself, I naturally try you correct, you know what I mean? As you say
Mhm.
something that isn't accurate, and that sometimes create more I think it sometimes creates more stress to say something that isn't where you know what I mean? To create more stress than it is rather helping the situation. Do you find that a lot in the families that you talk with, like, the the immediate auto correcting of their loved one. Because I would
Uh,
be bad about that, and my mother doesn't have the diagnosis, but I still do it. I'm horrible.
I think it's not just family members. I see professionals who do it too, where when someone's having difficulty with word finding, they're finishing the sentence for them. And
Mhm.
so when people are traveling the dementia journey, they will go in and out of being cognitively confused and cognitively alert. And if you end their sentence or you give them the answer and when they're cognitively alert, now they get defensive. Now they kind of feel
Mhm.
like they're being treated condescendingly or they're being treated like a child. And so as a human, and again, we live in a society where we want it now. We want things to happen faster than they do. I mean, that started way back when TV dinners were invented and you could have a full dinner and pop it in the oven and 30 minutes later you have this whole thing versus slaving in the kitchen. And then the microwave came along and then credit cards and then drive-throughs and God bless Amazon who will get me something on my doorstep within 24 hours when I order it. And so we've been conditioned as a society to want it now. And that is not what happens in the dementia journey. We need to have more patience. We need to allow the person to try to talk. If they're getting really frustrated, you can try to help. But I tell family members and I tell professionals, please don't try to finish their sentences. Please don't try to give them the word. Try to help them. I mean, if they're really struggling, then fine. But I think so often we believe we're helping by finishing their sentence for them or by making a decision for them and we're not. We actually can trigger when behaviors happen, and that's an entire different conversation. But 80% of behaviors that get triggered are triggered by the person who's interacting with the person with dementia. Only 20% of behaviors actually come from a dementia diagnosis. And so we don't want to be triggering things that now we have to deal with because we're creating more stress and more challenges in our caregiving role when we're interacting with the person with dementia versus just taking a step back and giving them time to respond. There's what's called the 90-second rule out there that people can Google. But really, when you're interacting with the person, you're really giving them 90 seconds to process what's being said and to be able to give you a response. And while 90 seconds doesn't sound like it's that long, when you're in the situation and you're actually kind of watching things, it's amazing how long 90 seconds actually feels.
Yeah, I get that. So now, dementia can sometimes lead to confusion, fear, anger, or anxiety. Now, how can family members mm, communicate effectively during those moments? Because I mean, I'm sure you yourself, you know what I mean, as a family member, are going to be stressed out too because you're also trying to give them that dignity. So,
Mhm.
how do you keep it all in check? How do you keep it all aligned to be able to still give them the dignity, but how to communicate effectively?
So it depends on what they're getting agitated about or scared about. I usually really direct people to look at the topic. So for instance, like if someone is saying, you know, there's a man in my room. Like these are actually things that have happened in my career with families that I've talked to or professionals in my buildings. And a daughter who was so frustrated because she'd get her mom put to bed that she was the mom was living with the daughter and she would have the mom go to bed and within minutes or something the mom would be up and she's panicked and she's anxious and she's like there's a man in my room and the daughter's like, Mom, there's not a man in your room. There's nobody in your room. And get her back into bed. And it would go on and on and on and on. So I was there one day and I went over, during bedtime and we got the mom to bed. And the daughter's like, You watch, she's going to be up here. And so I'm like, Well, show me where this man is. And I went back in the room and turned the lights off. And this stand in the corner that the daughter had her mom's hat on and a coat or something, like the person. And so when the daughter walked back in, the lights were on and she couldn't see what the mom was seeing. And so when I walked back in and the daughter all of a sudden, and I don't ever want someone to feel stupid and I'm really not trying to put them in that role. I'm trying to really educate them that you have to put yourself in that person's shoes and try to look at things from their perspective, not your perspective. And so many times when we can take the time to do that, all of a sudden we realize what the problem is. So once we removed this from the bedroom, the mom slept fine. She would go in there and go to bed because that wasn't standing in the corner. But in her mind, she had created that there was this man standing in the corner watching her. And all of a sudden, we simplified the process. And we didn't have to do medication changes. There was nothing that had to be done. We just removed what was scaring her. At the same time, that's why I always, when we talk about a dementia-friendly home, and that could be a whole other podcast, but some of the things, you know,
You know what? I just wrote that down.
creating a dementia-friendly home, because, when people are looking and, it's nighttime and you're looking out a window, what they're seeing is their reflection, but they think somebody's outside trying to break in. And
Mm.
so you wanna close the drapes, or you may have to remove mirrors because the person they see in the mirror isn't the person that they recognize any longer. So there's a lot of things. Even, I've had people who had a gentleman who the staff could not get him. It was like April, May here in Colorado, and he had on a turtleneck and a sweater, and the staff couldn't get him out of it, and he insisted that it was snowing outside, and my staff got into this argument with him, like, "It's not snowing." "Yes, it is." "No, it's not." "Yes, it is." I was like, "Oh my goodness." So I sat down with him and I just said, "Well, what's going on?" And he pointed outside. He goes, "It's snowing." And it was cotton flying from the cottonwood trees outside of his window. And I go, "Wow, look at that. That looks like a big snowstorm." And he just shook his head. "Yep." And I said, "Well, tell me about the biggest snowstorm you've ever been in." And all of a sudden he started talking and everything. And then I said, "Well, when you come inside, is it really warm?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I go, "Well, we're not going out today. Maybe we shouldn't be in some warm clothes." And we were able to slowly get him out of these warm clothes, but he insisted, because he saw what he believed was snow outside of his window flying, that he needed to be dressed appropriately for the weather. And so, again, when we put ourselves in the shoes of being in, the looking at it from their perspective, now, does that always work? No, it doesn't work. Nothing works 100% of the time. But if we can kind of say, "Well, show me or tell me, or why do you believe this?" versus just trying to correct the person. Because when you try to correct the person, they in their mind believe wholeheartedly this is the truth, and you're trying to correct them or reorient them. And now you've entered into an argument. And an argument is basically a tug of war, and both of you on both sides are going to keep pulling and pulling, and it just turns into a fight. And it's not a fight that a caregiver is going to win. The person with dementia is not going to budge. So if you can kind of just try to see things from their perspective and the show me or tell me or what's going on, you might realize what they're actually saying. And in their world, it's absolutely true. And you can understand why that is. And at the same time, you're protecting their dignity and you're respecting their perspective of the situation.
All right. So, Kathy, before we wrap up, what's one communication tip that you wish every caregiver and family member knew when supporting someone living with dementia?
Slow down. I would say slow down your talking and don't
Mm,
get too much information all at once. Just only one piece at a time. Give the 90-second rule, wait for them to respond, and then go to the second thing. I see so many caregivers who get frustrated, and when I sit and observe how they're communicating, they're talking too fast, they're saying too much, and they're not giving eye contact. So if they could do those three things and learn to use pictures or to use something in writing, they would change their way that they communicate and interact with their loved one.
right. I want to thank you once again, Kathy, for being with us. I greatly enjoy your input.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a joy always being on your show.
Awesome. I love that. Thank you to our listeners. Until next time, bye bye for now.